Death is the unyielding truth that binds us all, an inevitable, profound, and deeply intimate encounter with the finite nature of life. It arrives without warning, shattering the world we thought we knew. In its wake, grief emerges, often dismissed as something to fix or get over. But what if grief, in its suffocating pain, is not a burden to carry or something from which we need to move on? What if grief is instead a sacred invitation, an opening to feel more deeply, to connect in unimaginable ways, and to transform all that we knew to be true? I'm Laura Walton, and I'm so grateful you're here. Together, let's step into the uncharted terrain of death and grief, not as something to fear or avoid, but as a force that shapes us, breaks us, and ultimately remakes us. Let's meet it not with resistance, but with curiosity and courage. And let's do this on purpose. Welcome back to the Grief on Purpose podcast. I'm here today with Dr. Amy Robbins. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and you're coming to us from Chicago, is that right?
I am where the weather is starting to turn. So we are bracing ourselves as we always do this time of year.
Yeah, it's fall. It's a time of transition.
It is a big time of transition.
Yes. Yeah. Can you share just a little bit about who you are and what you do with your life?
Sure. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, so a therapist. I've been in private practice for 20 years. Almost 20 years. I'm also the director of mental health at a holistic wellness club in Chicago called Beyond. And I host my own podcast called Life, Death, and the Space Between, which is an exploration of life, death, consciousness, and what it all means. And I've recently really moved into the space of training therapists in what I'm calling spiritually informed therapy. So helping them better understand how to integrate spirituality into their clinical work, because I feel like everybody's talking about we're in a mental health crisis, and we are, but I think it's because we are in a spiritual health crisis and we have to be addressing, people talk about mind, body, spirit, but they don't really address spirituality and what that actually means to people. So that is where we talked for a few minutes before, and I asked you sort of how you ended up here and where you are now. And I think our paths are always kind of twisting and turning, and this is where mine has led, and it feels really, really aligned for me. So I'm excited about it.
Oh, I love that. And just even to hear you articulate it in that way, like it's so simple, but I feel like I'm in a similar place as far as where my interest lies, but I haven't articulated it in such a way. It's kind of something, especially maybe if I'll just speak for myself, but being trained as a therapist, I'm a therapist also, like it's maybe not even a place like the spirituality that we're like allowed to go. So to hear that even spoken is so exciting to me. I'm so excited for this conversation.
And I think that's exactly it. It's like everything else is talked about, but spirituality, and the way I think you and I have talked about it just briefly before this, is not. And it needs to be brought into the conversation.
Yeah. And I've theorized just for myself, like how that disconnection from it that you were talking about being such a huge problem that maybe we're not even like, most of us aren't even aware of, but such a piece that's contributing to the mental health crisis. Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. So somehow the social media algorithms led me to your path. I don't know how that happened.
Sometimes I love those algorithms and other times not so much. But this time I'm grateful.
I know. They're like, you might like her. And I'm like, I think I do. And so I stumbled across you on social media somehow and looked into your work a little bit. I don't know a ton about it and I'm excited to hear more. Reached out to you just to see if you might be willing to be on my podcast. And you said yes, which I'm so grateful for. But I'm just curious if there's any, I think you work within the topic of death. So having somebody reach out to you to talk about death maybe isn't the most surprising thing for you, but how you might have received that invitation to come on a podcast and talk about grief and death.
I think that people often, and when I was trying to figure out who I was in this space, and I can talk a little bit about how I got to where I got, but I never really felt like I belonged anywhere. Traditional psychotherapy is really how I practice in many ways, but it felt like it was missing the spiritual piece. I didn't want to do straight grief work, but I think in therapy, we're always doing grief work because we're always helping people with some sort of loss, whether it's a physical loss or just an emotional loss or a loss of a belief that something should be the way different than the way we wanted it to be. And so grief is always there, but I don't put myself out as a grief therapist. I'm not a medium, even though I have those abilities. And I wasn't specifically in the death space, even though I do talk a lot about death because my experience with death, both with people that I love and also my experience with people on the other side, and how I see death is really a really, really strong, it can be a really great catalyst to help you live if you can engage with it appropriately, not too much, but enough that it can really put that notion of mortality in front of you and help you think about what matters and what you want in your life. I think can be a really powerful tool. So I
Yeah.
sort of straddled all of those spaces. So I kind of often get people who are looking for spirituality and come to me, or looking for grief and come to me, because they just want to hear a different perspective on it than like a traditional grief perspective.
Mhm. Okay, so not surprising at all to have somebody reach out to you. Come talk to me about death over here. Yes, yeah. So where do we start here? How did this work start for you?
So death was, like for many people, I think, my lovely entree into this world. When I was 18 years old, I lost my aunt. She had juvenile onset diabetes. She was waiting for a kidney and pancreas transplant. And while she was waiting for the transplant, they needed to make sure that her heart would have been strong enough to withstand the transplant had she come up on the list. So I was a freshman in college, and she was actually the age that I am now, which is
Mm.
crazy because now my daughter is actually a freshman in college at the college I was, where I got the news that my aunt died. So we just brought her a couple weeks ago. And as you know, with grief, when you hit certain milestones and it shifts your perspective on things. So like
Mhm.
looking at my daughter and imagining what it would be like for her to receive the call that one of my siblings died, who she's extremely close to, which was my relationship with my aunt, or God forbid something happened to them, or to see myself as the age that my aunt was and think, how could that have had, like, she had so much
Mhm.
life ahead of her. I mean, I am no way ready to check out of this world right now. Like, I got a
Yeah.
lot of living to do. So all of those things combined, I think, really also just shake you up a little bit. It was a little sidebar.
Yeah.
And so I got that dreaded call that so many people who have probably listened or listening to this podcast get, of, she didn't make it through the surgery. And it was like not even on my radar that that was a possibility. So I went home, and then I came back to school after just a couple of days. My family's Jewish. We had Shiva. And so I came home for 3 or 4 days and then went back, and there was no space for grief. This was even before mental health was a thing. You know, people weren't really talking about mental health all that much back in the late 90s. And so I didn't really think much of it. I just went on my way, but I probably had anxiety before, but I developed a tremendous amount of anxiety, particularly around getting a job and being able to support myself. My aunt really struggled financially. She had gone through a really horrible divorce, had to go back to, she was a stay-at-home mom at the time. She had to go back to work in sort of conditions that weren't ideal for her illness. And the stress of all of that and the conditions kind of led to her quick demise. And so I was really hell-bent psychologically that I was not going to let that happen to me. I was never going to be dependent on someone to financially support myself. And it sort of sent me into a really bad spiral where I had tremendous, tremendous anxiety. My first panic attack when when I was looking to get jobs out of college and was getting rejection letter over rejection letter. And then went home after college, was living at home. I was working in this job that I was really, really unhappy with, and ended up quitting the job, waiting tables for a couple years, or not a couple years, for a couple months, like 6 to 8 months, volunteering and deciding I wanted to go back to graduate school. And again, I think that there was so much unprocessed grief for me that was showing up as anxiety. I didn't even know, and no one ever identified it as such. Like, I was seeing a therapist, and we talked about my aunt a little bit, but I think that there was much more focus on, like, what am I going to do with my life? But I now realize, hindsight's 2020, I now realize so much of how I was feeling was a result of this angst inside of me of, like, I cannot end up like her.
Mm.
And I ended up volunteering at what was Children's Memorial Hospital here in Chicago. I loved it. I decided I wanted to go back to graduate school. I applied to graduate school for clinical psych programs. I started, and my second year in the program, right before my cousin's wedding, her son, I had it was actually my second visit, but I didn't realize at the time that I had had another visit and I didn't have the words to put to it. To me, it was just a dream at that point, but I still can clearly see it in my mind's eye. So I know it was not a dream because I can't remember a dream when I wake up in the morning. So this was just very, very different. And in that visit, my aunt came to me and she was standing at the kitchen sink in my house that I grew up in. And she said to me, tell your mom. No, she wasn't standing at the kitchen sink. She showed me an image of my mom standing at the kitchen sink in my house, looking out the window. And she said to me, tell your mom not to be upset. I'm going to be there. I'm going to be at the wedding. And then she showed me another image that was of my uncle. And she said, tell him I hear him when he's out walking or pushing the stroller. I had a much younger cousin at the time. And he said, I hear him. Let him know I hear him when he's walking. So I come from a family of physicians. My uncle's an orthopedic surgeon. My father was a dentist. My grandfather was a pediatrician. We are not woo people at all. But I called my mom as soon as I woke up and I shared with her what my aunt had said, and my mom started crying. And she said, I was standing at the kitchen sink last night and I was talking to her and I was saying, I can't believe you're not going to be there. I can't believe you're not going to be at this wedding.
Goosebumps.
Yeah. And then I called my uncle, or I don't know if I called him right away, but my mom was like, you need to tell Uncle Richie. And sure enough, same thing. I shared with him the story and he said, that's when I talk to her. I talk to her when I'm out walking, running, pushing my cousin in the stroller. And I said, well, she hears you and she knows that you talk to her. And I sort of I didn't dismiss it at the time. I didn't know what to make of it. So I went to school that day and I had a professor who taught indigenous healing practices. And so I thought, okay, I didn't even know what indigenous healing practices were. This was my second year of graduate school. And I went to her and I said, I had this experience. I don't know what to make of it. And she said, I think you're opening up to something. And she gave me some Sylvia Browne books to read. And for people who don't know, Sylvia Browne was like the famous psychic medium back in the early 2000s. And she said, read these books. And here's the name of a medium I want you to go talk to. And I was like, I don't know what she's talking about, but I don't have time for this. I mean, in the throes of grad school, like practicum, internship, postdoc, all those things. So I sort of put it to the side. And then when my daughter was 18 months old, so about 5 years after that, my papa passed away. And the same thing happened, is that he came through in a very similar way in a visit with a message for my cousin, very specific, things I couldn't have known. And I was like, okay, this is interesting. And then it started happening with a patient. It started happening with patients where I'd have some intuitive hits. I'd have a similar experience in a dream state where their loved one came to visit me, but I couldn't validate it. There was nothing I could do about it because I just started a private practice, a couple years before. I certainly wasn't about to start saying, here I am with these medium experiences. And that's a surefire way to lose referrals. And so I kept that part under wraps, but I needed to understand more. And I reached back out to my professor. She gave me the name of that medium again, and I went down a parallel path. So I have my practice on one side, and I'm exploring spirituality on this other side. I'm exploring mediumship. This woman mentored me for several years. And then I did what I called my medium internship, where I invited people in. I sent out an email and said, friends of friends, anybody, please sign up for a reading. I just want to learn. And I did that for a couple years, and then trying to think chronologically. And then I realized, like, sure, that's really what I had some really, really profound experiences. I would do it for a little bit and then I'd kind of put it to the side. And then I had one experience where a friend of mine asked if we could do readings together, and we both brought people in. And actually, this was the start of the medium internship. And she said to me, will you do a reading with me? And I said, sure. And we both did this reading. And in this reading, this friend of mine, who was like more of an not a close friend, her father-in-law came through. And he said a whole bunch of stuff, but one of the things he showed me was this, like those class rings with the blue stones in them.
Mhm.
And I said, I don't know why he's showing me this ring. And she went home and told her husband, and her husband was like, my dad didn't wear rings. Like, he never wore jewelry. There's no way that was my dad. And sure enough, he goes home that weekend back to Philadelphia, where he's from. And his mom walks in the room and she says, I just found this ring of your dad's and I think he'd want you to have it. Well, he just about fell over. I just about fell over. And I was like, okay, maybe I need to give this a try. And that's when I did this medium internship where I saw people for several months. And then it just didn't feel like enough for me because I love, being a therapist. Like, I love being deep with people. I do a lot of depth psychology. I love doing really deep transformational work with people. And mediumship just didn't feel like enough for me. And so kind of put it on the back burner, but I still had this like really intense desire to bring this out into the world and to legitimize it in some way. And I felt like I had a voice of someone who's very grounded and very involved in my community. I'm on the school board and things like that. But I also had this whole other side of myself that was really in the closet for a long time. And I struggled with, do I sort of come out and say what these experiences are if they could help people, or do I keep quiet? And so my podcast was sort of the birth of like, oh, well, I can bring these two worlds together. I can bridge these two worlds in a way where I'm not a practicing medium, but I do have these experiences, and I want people to know that these are normal experiences, that lots of people have them. And then I do think that they're an important part of one's psychological development. Like, my life changed because of that visit. There's no question. My
Yeah.
anxiety decreased, my outlook on life, my capacity to see the world differently, my understanding of the nature of reality, like all of that changed from one spiritually transformative experience.
Yes. Yeah. They're so huge and impactful. I've had a couple things in the form of dreams that I really like how you describe that. Like, yes, I don't remember 95% of my dreams, but I've had a couple of these experiences that I remember very clearly.
Right.
But I've never thought of that as being a distinguishing factor in legitimizing it for something other than a dream.
Yeah,
I
and
like,
that's how I've always distinguished it, is it doesn't feel like that amalgam that a dream does. Like when my kids, I wish I had better dream recall, and I know that there's ways to get better at it, but like my kids dream very vividly, and when they describe their dreams, I'm like, what are you even talking about? I can't even follow,
yeah, they don't make
right?
sense.
They don't make
Yeah.
sense. Someone's they're symbolic usually,
Hmm.
but this very much was like a conversation.
You're right. Yeah. Again, I haven't thought about it in those terms, but my experience is the same. They make sense. They
Yes.
like follow a logical order. They're
And
very
there's,
different in that.
yeah, and it's clear. And so my first visit from my aunt, again, I remember it, and I didn't talk about my first actual visit for years, but I can still close my eyes and see it just as clearly. And in that visit, she was on the golf course. She was wearing red. She came to me and she said, tell everybody I'm healed, that my body is now healed. And she looked glowing. Like there was just like a glow to her entire being. And she was pretty sickly at the end. So she did not look well. She had like jaundice, her coloring was off. And there was a particular reason that she was on the golf course. It had to do with my mom, and my mom has a love of golf. And after my aunt died, my mom sounds so silly, but it was like this one thing that my mom really, really enjoyed. And she had a tremendous amount of survivor's guilt around it. And so she like couldn't golf, like psychologically,
Mhm.
she just like couldn't hit the ball. She couldn't putt the
Yeah.
ball. And so I think that part was symbolic, but the message was so clear. And
Hmm.
again, it is as clear today as it was 25 years ago, 26 years ago when I experienced it.
Hmm. Yeah. Same for me. How long have you had your podcast?
I started my podcast in 2000, the end of 2018. So
Oh, you've had it for quite a while.
7 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And so you're saying that it was with that podcast that you came out of the closet, so to speak, with all of this spiritual work. Is that correct?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I called the doctors who send patients to me, clients to
Uh-huh.
me, and I said, I just want to let you know I'm going to be coming out with this podcast, and it's a little bit out there. So there might be people who you refer to me, and if they look me up, they'll know this. And so I
Yeah.
want you to be aware of it, and I hope it won't impact your referrals to me. And it has
Okay.
not, and it's actually opened some of them up now
Yeah.
to being more curious about what's possible. And many of them will refer people to me because of this, and also because of, and they'll refer to my podcast for their medical patients to listen to.
Mhm. So did you just start that, like kind of breaking into that world in the form of conversations about experiences?
Yeah, so I had a couple people that I knew. I had a medium that I'd been working with. I had another medium that I had become friendly with because I was feeling really alone with all of this. And again, this was pre social media and pre, where everybody's posting and it seems like everybody's a medium
Yeah.
now or some sort of
Yeah.
intuitive. So this was before any of that was the case. And so I started to build like a little community, and then I just started reaching out to people, and I did a lot of training as well. There was a place in Chicago called the Infinity Foundation, which sadly is now gone, that offered continuing education. So I took continuing education in shamanism, in mediumship, in sound healing, in, I'm trying to think what else. I think those were the main ones. And at one of them, Eben Alexander, who wrote Proof of Heaven, was
Mm.
speaking about his experience and also how you use sound. And he and his girlfriend or wife or partner, whatever, have a company called Sacred Acoustics, which is a meditation with sound
Mm.
healing. And so I just walked up to him at the end of the conference or the whatever the course and said, I have this podcast. I'm just starting out. Would you be willing to be on it? And he said, I would love to be. And here I'm like, okay, this guy's been on Oprah. He's going to be
Yeah.
on my podcast. And so from there, I think it just kind of built. And I was just at the IANS conference. I don't know if you're familiar with the
Mm.
International Association of Near-Death Studies. And they have tons of experts. They had the woman who is involved in the telepathy tapes. Are you familiar with the telepathy
Mhm.
tapes? Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah. Diane Hennessy, who does a lot of the research with non-speaking autistics. She was one of the keynote speakers. Raymond Moody, keynote speaker. Bruce Grayson, keynote speaker. All of these keynote speakers have been on my podcast at some point already.
Mm.
So and many of their near-death experiencers have been on to tell their story. So it just snowballed, and I just kept getting braver and braver about asking who I wanted to be on it. And they kept saying yes. And so I was like, okay, so now I have this whole library for people of these incredible, not just stories, because the stories, I love learning through stories, and I think there's so much value through that, but also the science and the data to back it up. Because for people who are skeptical, and I get it, I was a skeptic, and sometimes I still am a skeptic. I'm still like, is that like if I have a reading or have an experience, I'm always questioning, I'm always wondering how that happened. And so I think that even for me, it's always good to be reinforcing there's the science and then there's the experiential piece.
Yeah. 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 I'm also a person who I'm like, I want the facts, give me the fact. Like, can you prove it to me?
Right.
So do you have any of the science and the data that you can point to?
I mean, so Bruce Grayson's work, his book After, is just about near-death experiencers, as well as Raymond Moody's Life After Life. And I mean, they just have story after story after story after story. And all of these stories are, I don't know what the percentage is, but there's amazing similarities between
Mm.
all of these stories. And these are people who are, they come from every walk of life. So it's not just people who have been reading about near-death experiences, then they have a near-death experience. I mean, Sebastian Younger, I don't know if people are familiar with him. He wrote The Perfect Storm. He was on my podcast, very much a materialist historically. And then he goes and has this crazy experience where he almost dies, where he dies. I mean, he was dead. I think he had I can't remember specifically. I think he had an embolism, a pancreatic embolism or something. And he saw his father, and he's talking about staring into this abyss. And he's like, I don't know what it was, but he went on this journey to try to figure out how these things happen. It is not just the chemicals in our brain, it is so much more than that. And people who
Mm.
have had very, very short time experiences, right? They don't seem to be dead for a very long amount of time, but the information that they come back with is just unexplainable.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so profound. And one of my favorite stories is this pianist who was an orthopedic surgeon. And I had him in my podcast. He was one of the very first people I interviewed who was a near-death experiencer. He was the surgeon. He got struck by lightning. And the way that he describes what happened to him, the people who were running through him as he was trying to get to them upstairs, because he didn't realize he wasn't in a physical body anymore, they were coming literally through. At that point, he thought, I'm still alive, but he wasn't. And then developed this incredible ability to play the piano and write music. And he'd never had that before.
Oh, wow.
And so there's something in all, I mean, obviously we can't recreate these scenarios in a controlled setting. And I think that unfortunately that becomes where a lot of the rub is as well. You can't bring someone in and you can't have a control group and the other group, which I can't think of the name of right now, to say, okay, well, you're going to have a near-death experience and you're not, and we're going to see what happens in the end.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so we have to go just off of these experiences that people share, these stories that people share over and over, this concept of the life review that people talk about, where they see their life flash before their eyes, but they really experience their life from the perspective of each person who they've impacted along the way. And those are the stories for me that when I incorporate them in my work are so profound and transformative, because if you can live and think about every decision you make, every choice that you make, every interaction that you have with another person is something you could later experience in your life review, you will know what it feels like to have been the person on the receiving end of any of your
Mm-hmm.
behaviors, any of your moods, any of the things you say. It really can stop you in your tracks in terms of how you treat other people.
I love it put in that perspective, like not in the perspective of judgment, like you're being judged for your choices or your actions, but through the perspective of the experience of the other who it impacted.
Right.
Yeah, I
Right.
love
And
that.
just what it felt like. Like
Mm-hmm.
you will now experience what it felt like, again, without judgment, because they're not probably judging you in that moment. They're feeling whatever it is you made them feel. And
Yeah.
that could be good or bad. I mean, that could be
Well, yeah.
positive or negative.
And in some ways, I would think of that as the judgment is coming from yourself. Like you're giving yourself that judgment based off of how you feel about how you impacted this person.
Mhm. And that's
Yeah.
when people talk. I don't usually go down a religious path because I think
Mm-hmm.
religion has can be really positive, but I think there's also a lot of trauma. That is that. I mean, I've worked with a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people who have had to
Yeah.
help through the trauma that their religion caused for them. But when people talk about the concept of heaven and hell, I'm like, it's not a place you go. It's an experience. And so if you treat people horribly over the course of your life, that life review is going to feel like hell.
Terrible.
It's
Yeah.
going to feel terrible. Right. I mean, that to me is enough. Like I am far from perfect, but I really use that in my everyday life as sort of some barometer to how am I wanting to comport myself? How am I wanting to behave? Even when I disagree with someone, how do I show up in that disagreement
Mm-hmm.
so that at least I can feel like I expressed myself without being nasty?
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, I love that perspective so much. Yeah.
It changes things.
It does. It does. It changes everything.
Mhm.
So, what are your beliefs about what happens then when we die? Or what do you know to be true about what happens when we die?
Well, I don't know anything to be 100% true.
Okay.
So my experience and what I think based on my aunt is that I believe that I don't think that there are words that can explain what this is. And Raymond Moody just presented on this specifically at this conference. He was like, the problem is that we don't have the words to describe what this afterlife is. And so the issue isn't, is there an afterlife or not? It's that we don't have words to describe what it is. And so once we can have words to describe what it is, then we'll be on the path to there is.
Uh-huh.
And so I believe that our soul doesn't die. I believe that it goes on. I think it's hard to wrap our mind around what that looks like, because I think we think it should look like this, but it doesn't. It's energy. Did you see the movie Soul, the Pixar movie Soul?
I think I did. Are they kind of bouncing around in the
Yes.
clouds? Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I did see that.
I
Yeah.
think they did like a really good job in my
Yeah.
mind of portraying what that looks like, is that
Hmm.
you kind of rejoin this larger consciousness, that we are all a part of that, that oneness, that greater consciousness, and that this body just separates us from that. Because
Yeah.
I think when people have these deep, profound spiritual experiences through meditation, through breath work, through psychedelics, through just random spiritually transformative experiences, through near-death experiences, and they experience that expanded oneness, they're experiencing what it is like to not be in this meat suit anymore, this physical heavy suit. And so that to me is what happens, is you just get like super expansive into this space, and the consciousness is just kind of all collectively one. It all feels loving and peaceful and joyful, and is just about love and growing and healing and evolving.
Hmm. Have you had any of your own experiences of something like this?
Yeah, so
Mhm.
I went down a pretty deep rabbit hole a couple years ago of psychedelic experiences, and which is very uncharacteristic of me. If anybody
Mhm.
knows me from growing up and they listen to this or ever heard I did any of this, they'd be like, last person I would have ever thought would touch anything. Like, I don't drink a lot, I don't smoke pot, I don't use edibles, I don't like any of that. But I was very curious, having had some of these spiritual experiences and having had some meditative experiences that were really profound. Like, what is the difference here? What is the difference between profound meditative experience, medically a medicine induced experience, a breathwork experience? And I did several different journeys. I did two 5-MeO DMT, one 5-MeO DMT, some MDMA, and 5-MeO DMT, MDMA and mushrooms on their own, or psilocybin on its own. And I mean, it's profound. But what I've also learned is that I can access those spaces other ways. Like, I can get there
Mhm.
very quickly in a breathwork session now.
Mhm.
And I don't know that I think for me, it's just been an opportunity to show that you can access these different states of consciousness through many different doors. There isn't
Mhm.
only one door in which you can get there. And once you practice and once you know what that experience is, it's easier to drop into it, and it
Mhm.
becomes easier to recognize when it's
Mhm.
happening.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, it's not such a foreign concept and it's more easily accessible, I think. Yeah, because as we were talking, like I've never had a near-death experience, but I have done some plant medicine stuff. And the way you're describing it sounded
Hmm.
similar to some of those experiences. So you've had that doorway has been opened in
Right,
a sense.
right,
So now I've had that experience and know what that feels like.
right. And then I do think, too, part of it is like, I mean, in my first medicine experience, which was 5-MeO DMT, I didn't read anything about it. And just someone just suggested
Sign me
it.
up.
And right. And I was like, I'm just gonna follow my gut. And not, I don't recommend that. Not sure that was the smartest thing, but it was really powerful. And it was also very much an exercise in trust. And I think that the more you access these altered states, the more you learn just to lean into them a little bit. So, like
Yes. Yeah.
now in a sound, I can get the same effects that I do with like an MDMA and 5-MeO DMT. I can get there in a breathwork session within like a round of breathwork. And so I don't need the medicine anymore to get me to that
Yeah.
altered state. And some
Mhm.
of it is just like recognizing what it is, and also just allowing yourself and trusting yourself that you
Yeah.
can let go and lean into it. And I think we grip so much and we're so afraid and
Yeah.
of any of these experiences. And I don't know why my aunt came to me. I do know
Mhm.
because I've had some readings. I think some of it was that I was open. I think she saw in me a potential to kind of heal a lot of her own like, I think she used me in many ways to sort of heal some ancestral trauma that could have very easily gotten passed down and passed down and passed down. And I think the experiences can be so profound and can really be so transformative. However, you get
Yeah.
there. Some
Yeah.
people never need to use plant medicine. For some people, they cannot let go enough, and plant medicine helps. And for some people, plant medicine doesn't even help with
Yeah.
that. They still
Yeah.
can't let go.
Yeah. So it's been a lot of years now since your aunt came to you. Do you still feel her? Do you still have a connection with her in some form?
I do, but it's not as, although I feel like more recently she has been a little bit, I felt her energy a little bit more. And I think it's because I'm sort of stepping into some new work. And I think she's very much a guide for me in that. But for a long time, she was very quiet. Like, I did not feel her presence. But interesting that you would ask that, because recently I definitely have. I do feel like I feel it more than I had in the past.
Okay. So I have a question, and I don't mean to put you on the spot if you don't know the answer, that's okay. But because this is something I wonder about all the time, is once a lot of time has passed since a person has died, if we believe that we're souls, that there are souls that go into different lives, how do we know, or when does it happen, or when that soul might go into a different life, and how does that change, or does that change how connected we feel to them?
So I've heard many different takes on this, and I don't know again for sure. I have heard that it's perhaps just like we go back into sort of this source oneness, like that maybe a part of us can stay there and a part of us can reincarnate into a new soul.
Okay.
So it's not, again, I've heard that, but then I've heard the entire soul reincarnate. So I think, again, it's like what Raymond Moody was saying, is that we don't necessarily have the words to understand
We
all of
can't explain
these
that. Yeah.
experiences.
I know
And
I'm wanting to
so
put words to it. It's so
and it's
frustrating.
so right. It's so
Yeah.
human to want to. And I
Yeah.
think there has to be some kind of suspension of belief, disbelief, suspension of belief that we don't know exactly the mechanisms by which this all works. And I've also heard like some people reincarnate really quickly, and some people they don't reincarnate
Yeah.
for hundreds of years. Like, I've heard all of it. And I've had my own personal kind of past life experiences where I think that I died not that long ago and came back, because I've had these just intuitive experiences where I'm like, I have such like visceral reactions to things that I know didn't happen to me in this lifetime. And so that makes me so curious, but I don't feel like I have this for sure answers to any.
Yeah. Your answer is a good one, though. And it might answer the question for me, because this has been something I ponder quite a lot, but like just not having the words to be able to answer it or to explain that concept. To me, that's the answer.
I
So thank you.
thank Raymond Moody for that. He's much more brilliant than I
Yeah.
could even be close to being. But yeah, I think that's what it is. And
Mhm.
that's what, when people describe him, that's one of the markers of these near-death experiences, is the ineffability of them, like the difficulty in describing exactly what they were. And I think if you've had plant medicine experiences or breath work experiences or whatever it is, or even this visit, there is a piece of it that just feels like I can't, even if I describe it to you in the best way I can, there are pieces of it that feel like they're indescribable, like the realness of it, the experience of time in it, the connection of it all, the joy of it all. It just feels like there's not really enough words.
Yeah. Yeah, I
The
get that.
beauty at times.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So you do clinical work still, is that right? Yeah.
I do. Yeah, I have a private practice.
Okay. It's such a broad topic, but does the work kind of focus around this very broad topic of spirituality and how it intersects with maybe more traditional mental health or psychotherapy
I
work?
think it depends in some ways how open people are to it. And that's something that I try to assess. I think that one of the things that's become clearer and clearer to me is, and I just finished teaching my first cohort of my course, Spiritually Informed Therapy. And one of the things that one of the people who went through the program just recently reached out to me and texted was, she said, it's amazing how my clients are bringing up spirituality more. And I said, because she said, even if I'm not talking about it, and I said, because your energy around it has shifted. So even if you've never said anything, they are picking up on something probably energetically that says it's okay for you to talk about this. And I think that some people in my clinical work are like all in and they want to talk about it, and other people not so much. And that's fine. I don't push it on anybody, but I do think that how I show up in my clinical work is a result of my spiritual work. And so I do show up very open, very loving. I don't think that my treatment modality, people are like, what's your modality? And I was trained in traditional psychodynamic psychotherapy. I still practice very much from a relational perspective, looking at how early childhood relationships and attachments impact people's lives and their relationships moving forward. But I do incorporate a lot of that other stuff, and I show up from a very loving place. And I think that in itself is healing. And that is something that my spirituality has taught me, is that I trust the process now, maybe because I've been doing it for 20 years, but I don't need to, even in those moments where, and I have had those recently where I'll be like, oh God, hope we're going to get through this. I hope this person's going to make it through whatever they're, or how is this going? And I'm like, just lean into it. You've been here before. Just trust. You know how this unfolds. Just trust that you are on this path, walking beside them, helping guide them, but this is their path that they need to be moving down. And so it's freed me up in a lot of ways too. I had a supervisor years ago that said to me, you're responsible to, not responsible. Was it you're responsible to, not responsible for? And that really resonated with me, and I didn't know that I understood it to the depth that it continues to evolve for me. It's like I am responsible to show up, to be there, to support, but I am not responsible for everything that you do and the choices that you make in your.
You just made a light bulb go off for me, because it's been more, this has been something I've been curious about for a long time, the spirituality, but like it's been in the last like year or so, like a really deep dive into it, and last couple of years deep dive into the plant medicine stuff. And so a lot has shifted for me in that way just in the last couple of years. And lately, as it relates to my clinical work, I've been feeling like I'm coming at it from a different place, like much more grounded, much more relaxed around it than I might have been before. And I haven't really known why, but I think you just nailed it for me. Like it's that spiritual work that's been, I think, the undercurrent to that is just, I'm not just showing up in my practice differently. I think I'm showing up in life differently, but I'm noticing that in my practice. So because very interesting.
When you do, and this is what I love about this work, is from a clinical perspective, it's not just clinical, it's personal. So you do the personal growth and you're digging deeper into yourself, into understanding yourself, to knowing yourself. And your clinical work can't help but benefit from that.
Yes.
Because if you have a deeper understanding of yourself, I think, and I've always been a proponent, I was in therapy for 17 years. I'm a huge proponent of like every therapist should experience what it's like to be on the other side of that couch, because it's so vulnerable. And it just like takes your breath away when you have to be the one on the other side, like sharing your deepest, darkest secrets and knowing what that feels like with basically a complete stranger initially.
Yeah.
And it's sort of the same in this work. And I think that's what led me like into the plant medicine, is I was really curious when people were talking about this is where the field is headed. I was like, well, I can't profess that I understand the mechanisms of this without in a different way. Than I don't feel like I need to do every form of therapy to understand how each different therapeutic modality works. But there was something about plant medicine that was like, okay, what are all these people talking about? How does this work? I need to understand it from watching my own brain.
Same. Yeah, that's how I approach it too. So we have a lot of things in common, it sounds like.
It sounds like it. And maybe it was just an excuse for me to do plant medicine.
To do some plant medicine.
Right. That was like acceptable to my parents and friends.
Yeah. Okay. Well, is there anything else? I'm sure there's a lot more that you could say, but is there anything else that feels important to say before we wrap up for today?
I think to just encourage people to be open and curious, like that in life, in this space, I mean, your listeners probably are because they're listening to you, and it sounds like this is a path that you've been pursuing as of late. But just start to pay attention to what I call is these tiny little miracles of life, like these amazing synchronicities that show up. And because the more you start doing that, the more they start showing up. The more you start doing it, the more they start showing up. And then life becomes really magical and playful and fun and joyous. And it doesn't mean that life doesn't also be is hard sometimes, but that you can ride those waves a little bit easier
Yeah.
because you trust in some ways that you are supported and you trust that you can get through things.
Yeah.
And I think we've become such a culture of like, I just need to be happy. And people always say to me, like, is your goal for your kids' happiness, or you just want your kids to be happy? And I'm like, of course I do. But more than being happy, I want them to know that they can cope with whatever life throws at them and that they can come out of it and find goodness and joy and love and connection and whatever it is that lights them up. Because life is hard. And if we can't ride the waves, it's really, really hard.
Yeah. That is the perfect ending. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you. This is
Yes.
awesome.
Yeah. And thank you so much for being here today. I'm just very excited that, again, I feel like I have a lot of my interests are very similar to where your interests are, and the ways that you're able to articulate it is the way that I haven't been able to yet. And so I personally appreciate that articulation there and hearing about all of this from the perspective that you have because you've obviously been involved in it and had real experience with it for a long time. And I really appreciate that. So thank you.
Thank you. It's taken me a long time to be able to articulate it too.
Yeah,
So
it's hard to articulate.
it is hard. And
Yes.
it's helpful for me to hear that it's landing in the way that I intend it to land. Because
Yes.
sometimes I'm like, it makes sense up here, but like, does it make sense when it comes out of my mouth?
Yes. Well, it makes sense to me. So thank
Good.
you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here with me, Laura Walton, and my incredible guest on Grief on Purpose. Your presence is a gift, and I'm so grateful you're walking this path with us. For more connection and resources, you'll find everything you need in the show description. To my guests, thank you for sharing your person with us today. It is truly an honor to know your story. I'm your host, Laura Walton. Until next time, be kind to yourself and remember you're not alone in your grief. We are here on purpose.